Greetings lore seekers and welcome to another episode of the Lost Archives, a Star Wars Legends lore series. This week I'm going to be talking about the Baran Do sages. Now, who exactly were the Baran Do sages? Well, like many other groups around the galaxy, they were a Force-sensitive tradition from a specific group of people. In this case, it was the Keldor. If you're not sure who the Keldor are, if you've watched the Clone Wars episodes 1 to 3, you will know of Jedi Master Plo Koon. This is his people. Now, the Baran Do were his people's group of Force sensitives that arose before the Keldor joined the Republic. It typically served the ruling families and classes of the Keldori people as advisors and seers. The main reason for this is they would use their Force abilities to enhance their natural senses, allowing them to detect dangerous weather phenomenon and also warning people well in advance of natural disasters. When they weren't doing this as well, they would sit around and meditate on their aspect of the Force, which gave them small glimpses into the future. This actually did make them very important to the leadership of the Keldor, as they were able to help direct society in ways they believed that would benefit their people. A couple of examples of this would be times when they prevented war or stopping severe catastrophes long in advance when they were in their infancy. This did mean that many of them were awarded governmental positions and acted in a more official role, something that the Jedi would probably have disagreed with, saying they shouldn't act as a leader, they should act as the servant of the society. But then we all know about the dogma of the Jedi Order, so let's not go in that particular beehive just yet. The coming of the Republic and the Jedi Order would actually prove to be a bit of a problem for the Baran Do, in that most of the Force-sensitive children of the Keldori people would then start to be going to the Jedi Order to train in the ways of the Force. So it looked as though their order might eventually fade into obscurity or die out. Thankfully, many Keldor Jedi eventually would come back in their twilight years and join the Baran Do. Master Plo Koon of the Jedi Order actually had a dual membership of both orders. So much so, in fact, that he actually didn't teach many of the techniques he knew from the Baran Do to the Jedi. Citing in an interview he had in the Jedi Archives, "My order has specific abilities beyond this order's." Bit arrogant there, just for a Jedi, Master Plo Koon. Anyway, moving on. While this was happening, the Baran Do did actually fade into obscurity on their homeworld and became quite reclusive. They did still accept any new recruits who wanted to join them, and they would train them. As I previously mentioned, most of them would go off to the Jedi Order though, and they wouldn't come back until they were old people. This actually did allow for the rise of the belief that the Keldor viewed them as eccentric wizards. Until the day of the Jedi Purge came, however, when the Jedi were wiped out of existence by the Palpatine's New Order. This obscurity was actually the saving grace of the Keldori Baran Do, because it meant the Empire didn't consider them to be a problem, and so Palpatine wouldn't make them either bend the knee or wipe them out. Though it did make them extremely paranoid. But on the bright side, they regained their previous recruiting processes where everyone would send their children to them, now that the Jedi had gone. Though the current master at the time decided to take desperate measures to ensure the survival of the sages. So he started construction on the underground cavern and then faked his death, becoming known as one of the very first hidden ones. Essentially, Masters of the Order and Masters of Combat, as they were both known, or any elderly masters of any of the Order who would be viewed as essential to the future survival of the Baran Do in times of strife, would fake their death, pop down a underground tunnel and join an underground cavern, where all previous masters who had sacrificed themselves, seemingly to the Force, as the tradition went, would reside, and they'd carve out this underground hovel, and then if to whatever event would happen, be it nature or an occupying force, wiped out the Baran Do, they would continue to train their Force sensitives from this new hidden location. Bit extreme, but hey, Palpatine's Purge did cause a lot of fear to a lot of other Force groups around the galaxy. That's why a lot of them actually hid once Palpatine's order came into being. Now, to any outsiders who did discover them and were forced to stay with them underground, they would tell them that they would simply teach these new students the abilities of the Baran Do via telepathy. This, however, was a complete and utter fabrication, as hidden in one of the roofs of their underground cavern was a switch that would reveal a staircase which would go up to a hangar bay, whereas the main tunnel would be detonated upon the issue of a forced telekinetic push into a specific ceiling in their underground cavern, which would destroy the tunnels connecting them. That'd be a bit of a problem because, you know, Palpatine was nothing if going, they detonated a secret cavern, did they? Dig it out, I want to know what they're hiding. Jedi Master Luke, after discovering this, did kind of say to them, look, the reason why we survived is because we were so well spread across the galaxy. This would lead to a lot of the Masters eventually returning to the surface. I wonder how they were going to explain that to the rest of the Sages, but we'll see. Well, we won't see now because the Expanded Universe has ended. That's a shame. Anyway, back on topic. That hopefully a lot of the Baran Do would start doing missions across the galaxy in order to, you know, spread their order far and wide. So if something was to happen, there'd be enough of them left that someone could quite easily restart the order like Luke had done. I must say quite easily. If he hadn't got as lucky as he had with a lot of things, he probably would have had a much tougher time for it. But then the Purge wasn't as successful as Palpatine would have hoped. It was devastating. There's no arguing about that. But it wasn't successful in its primary goal of completely wiping out the Jedi Order. Enough of it survived that a new version of it did rise. When that new version did rise, the Baran Do did contact its leader and say, we'd like to work with you in the future and foster friendships, as Luke tried to do with many other Force-sensitive groups around the galaxy. Swiftly moving on to their philosophy on the Force. The Baran Do sages didn't really consider themselves to be a militant order, unlike the Jedi, even though the Jedi would say they weren't that militant. This meant that they didn't construct or use lightsabers. They did have options for anyone who wanted to study combat, specifically in the martial arts, and a stick-like weapon that is very similar in practicality to Yoda's stick that he used to carry around with him. This is why they'd have the Master of Combat known as the Senior Combat Instructor, who would still be subservient to the Master of the Order. Now, their main methodology was centred around finding inner peace and calm, and growing closer to the Force by heeding it. They did cancel against rash action and spent a great deal of time in meditation. They would contemplate the mysteries of the Force, and many would confuse this with the emphasis on meditation and contemplation for apathy or reluctance to act, but what it really meant is that they wanted to be precise and act at the perfect moment as dictated by the Force. Their Force abilities did centre on three main aspects. This would be weather control, so whirlwind like abilities was one of their special talents, and lightning, as well as a heavy use and proficiency with telekinesis. Corran Hor is probably crying right now. Corran Hor is a Jedi Knight who has no ability for telekinesis whatsoever. He'll be getting his own video at some point. Now, those who did train in combat also did use the Force in this combat training. If you've watched in canon, Electric Judgment was a technique used by Plo Koon. This didn't actually exist in the Expanded Universe, it was more known as the White Lightning technique, and I do think that may have been the inspiration for Electric Judgment. Electric Judgment is essentially a light side version of the power of Force Lightning. Though I'll get into a little bit of a controversy surrounding that being associated with the dark side. That was once again another bit of the hypocrisy of the old Jedi Order. Just a quick amendment here, guys. What Electric Judgment is actually part of Legends canon. Something I had a look into while I was finishing up my notes and stuff for this. It was released in, I believe, either a novel or the cartoon TV series shortly before Disney acquired LucasArts. In fact, I think it was during the process was ongoing. It's specifically mentioned in the Clone Wars children's book, Star Wars The Clone Wars Who Are the Jedi, written by Glenn Dakin. If you ever get a chance, check out the book. I certainly will be after reading this. Anyway, back to the video at hand. I'll also drop a link in the description to the book and Electric Judgment in the description. Anyway, back to the main discussion. Another one of their more interesting uses of telekinesis is that there was a battle between Ben Skywalker, Luke's son, and one of their students for the right to see the Master of the Order. This was a challenge issued. It's a particularly good scene in one of the Fate of the Jedi books, whereas seeing as Ben and Luke are on the Caldori homeworld, Doran, they can't breathe the atmosphere, so they have to use rebreathers. Now, in an attempt to stop the fight early, she would target Ben's rebreathing apparatus specifically, eventually succeeding in getting it off and using the Force to tear it away from him and throw it across the room. Ben obviously continued the fight and just took one last gulp of air before holding his breath, before using the Force to firstly retrieve his rebreather and then use it to hit the Keldor on the back of the head. Excellent Force battle that was. I will be going into that at some point as well. One other technique that does deserve note here is the technique simply known as the Way of the Lightning Rod. Now, the whole practice of the technique itself is to actually be used as a sort of anti-lightning rod to protect oneself from electrical currents and electromagnetic radiation. The problem is with it is if you perform it in the wrong way, you turn yourself into a lightning rod and would get shot repeatedly with blasts of electricity. It was particularly dangerous to do this in an electric storm on Doran's surface. Those of you who have been listening, you've probably been sitting there thinking, hang on, he's not mentioned any dark side version of the Baran Do. Well, the Sages did have a small cell of opposed view worshipping Baran Do. These essentially were a secretive version of it that attempted to conceal themselves but failed and were swiftly dealt with, that worshipped the dead Sith Lord Darth Sion. I am actually referring to Darth Sion, the Lord of Pain from Knights of the Old Republic 2, the Sith Lords. That's the beauty of the expanded universe, everything was interconnected and could feed off each other. And I really do hope, despite its many problems, the Disney canon can do that in the future. But yes, back on topic. The secretive version of this sect was quite severely dealt with by the Baran Do, as seen as though they weren't following the proper views on the Force. Anyway guys, this has been my breakdown on the Baran Do Sages. If you like what you heard, perhaps maybe leave me a comment, maybe with a little bit of feedback. This does help out the channel quite a bit, as long as it's constructive. If you do subscribe, please check the bells for notifications so that you can stay up to date with the channel and the various things I'm doing with lore and gaming videos. And above all, take care and have a good day. See you on the next episode.